and this happened when I was in graduate school, I had a lot of bad habits. I smoked like a pack of cigarettes a day, and I drank a lot. I came from this little town in northern Alberta, and like many little towns, especially in northern Canada, the alcohol overuse is de rigueur, you know, and so I noticed when I was in my early 20s that the only time I really regretted what I had done was when I was drinking. Now, it was also interfering with me writing because I couldn't concentrate well enough if I was hungover, but I also couldn't really I couldn't tolerate the emotional strain of what I was writing about when I was hungover. I couldn't handle being on the edge because I destabilized my nervous system. In any case, I stopped drinking. And the reason for that was, well, I decided I didn't want to be ashamed of what I was doing anymore. I thought, well, maybe I could not do things that were shameful and then see what my life was like. So that was sort of on the negative end, the constraint end. I think people get, on the more positive end, people get deeply involved in what they're doing if they're in the right place in the right time. So that I would say you can tell, this is the idea of heaven on earth to some degree. When time stops, when you're not aware of the duration of time, when you're so engaged with what you're doing that you're not aware of the duration of time, then you've got the forces of chaos and order balanced properly. You're not stultified and bored. That's an excess of order. Everything's too predictable. You're not overwhelmed. You're dealing with, you're playing tennis at the peak of your game. That's partly what people experience when they're great athletes, when they play.
The zone, yeah.
You know, and they're always stretching themselves to their limit. You can tell that if you watch a gymnast, for example, who has a brilliant performance. They've stretched themselves beyond their domain of competence during the performance. And that's what makes everybody leap to their feet. That's the incarnation given embodiment right there in front of you for some moments. And everyone cheers that on. Well, it requires even to some degree some good fortune to maintain. I certainly haven't been able to do that while I was ill. You know, and time, one of the consequences of my illness, whatever it was or is, was time dilation. Like days lasted weeks, it seemed like minutes lasted hours. And I mean that literally. And that was terrible. The weight of time, it's the weight of brute mortality. It's the weight of self-consciousness. And you escape that immersed properly. So, and that second chapter is a pretty practical chapter. It's like, well, if you're not who you want to be, then think about how you could be better. Take a chance, aim at that, work at it, and see what happens. So that's a disciplinary routine, I would say.
Yeah, and
it takes you out of your current order.
I think that's also, it's a perfect segue to chapter 3, which is do not hide unwanted things in the fog, which seems to me we live in a constant state of distraction now. You've mentioned Twitter a couple of times. It's like, is Twitter bringing any of us happiness, or is it keeping us all in a constant state of fog? The overload and the endless obsession with politics, that all seems like a fog to me. You know, I do my August off the grid, and I do that. Yeah. I do that to get out of the fog.
Distraction is definitely fog. And you'll distract yourself. I think you distract yourself mostly when your conscience is bothering you, because you don't want to face what it is in your life that is uncomfortable. That chapter is again quite practical. It's a reminder to pay attention often to negative emotion, resentment and that sort of thing, because it can tell you, well, resentment is very useful. Maybe your partner is talking to someone and they're a little bit more animated than you'd like, and you get jealous, and that jealousy is associated with a whole set of insecurities. Or maybe they're flirting and they shouldn't be. It's not that easy to determine, and maybe you'll have a big fight about that, but you could just as well pretend that didn't happen. You know, the emotion comes up, I'm jealous, I'm resentful, it's associated with experiences like that in the past. The psychoanalysts would have called that a complex. You could notice that. You could think, well, should I be jealous? Is there something wrong with me? Or there's something wrong with my partner? Or there's something wrong with the relationship? And you have to untangle that. And who knows what you'll have to untangle to get that straight. Or you can bear the jealousy and see what'll happen in the relationship. Or maybe it'll disintegrate because your partner is flirting and you ignore that. It's not like you repress it exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And this chapter is an attempt to distinguish repression from this hiding in the fog. It's that you get a hint that something's wrong. And then you have to unpack that hint to pull the information out. So maybe your partner is flirting and they shouldn't be. And so then you have to find out why they're dissatisfied with the relationship, or what's tempting them, or what is crooked in their soul at the moment, or what they're dissatisfied about. Terrible journey of exploration and discovery. That's always presented as something that's positive. It's often not at all. It's so hard. It's like doing surgery on a suppurating wound. It's no wonder people avoid it. Mm-hmm. But it's not helpful. Because all it does is leave those things grow and multiply in the dark. And if you ignore them, they just cascade.
Do you think that's just self-protection for most people? That most people, they see it, they know that truth behind them, whether it's about their partner or whatever it might be, but it's just self-protection, like, oh, I just got to keep moving on as things are, that we're just creatures of habit or something like that? Well,
sometimes it's that, and it especially gets to be that if it's accumulated for a long time, because if you wouldn't deal with it when it was a kitten, you're not going to deal with it when it's a full-grown lion.
Yeah.
And so, but I think mostly it's something else I return to in the book is it's deceit, resentment, and arrogance. I already know what I need to know. That's arrogance. Deceit is I don't have to pay attention to that. And resentment is, well, things can go to hell and so can he or she. And that's a pretty dark triad. And you don't want the spirit that embodies that to take over your life. That's for sure. People are often resentful if they see that responsibility has been abdicated. Why isn't that person doing their job? It's like, well, hey man, step in at your workplace, in your family. And you think, well, I shouldn't have to do that extra work. Well, you shouldn't be a slave. You shouldn't allow yourself to be tyrannized. But if something bugs you because a responsibility is going unfulfilled, there's a great opportunity for you. And this is something I don't think we teach young people well. And one of the things, you may remember this, that was so striking about the tour was that I made a case fairly consistently that most people find the meaning that sustains them through the vicissitudes of life, not in happiness, but in responsibility. And that would bring everyone to a halt. It would always make the whole theater silent. It's like, oh, I never thought of that connection. Because maybe you want to avoid responsibility, and you can understand why. You can understand why. You hide from it. Like Abraham, one of the biblical stories, Abraham, he stays in his father's tent till he's like 80, and then God gets fed up and tells him to get the hell out and grow up, and everything that he encounters is catastrophic. He encounters tyranny, the Egyptians conspire to steal his wife, he encounters starvation and war. That is what you encounter if you go out in the world. You think, who the hell wants that? I don't want the responsibility. It's like, well, yes, you do, as it turns out. There's nothing better than responsibility. Now, I say that with some caution. I think that it's hard to say. The responsibility, I've been overwhelmed by my apparent responsibility. But I think it's also kept me alive. And I mean that literally.
Poor people say, I can't afford it, I can't do that, I don't have time. It's an escape, you know what I mean? It's easy to say, I can't afford it. Oh, I'm too tired. Oh, I can't go to the gym. No, when you could go to the gym. No, I can't. The truth is, I'm just too lazy to go to the gym.
Money doesn't have value, right? And this is an important thing that most people don't immediately understand, is that money itself doesn't have value. Money is a vector for transmitting value. It's how you express value. But the value isn't in the money, it's in the product or service you bought with it. and it's in the labor you gave in order to acquire it in the first place, that's where the value comes from. There's nothing intrinsically valuable in the money.